I am not trans femme. Nah, I'm joking. We're not opening like that. Hi, I'm Faust. I normally do playthroughs of games I like, but this is something that has been messing with me for a while now, so I guess I'm a video essayist. When you think of trans artists, who do you think of? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Obviously, your answer will vary depending on who you are, but my first thought, and I feel like a lot of people's first thought, is Noelle Stockwood, otherwise known as Femtanyl. She makes breakcore music along with her co-producer, Juno Calendar. Yeah, there are two of them. There are two of them. It's not just one Femtanyl. And both of them are trans femme. Many videos covering breakcore music, trans femme music, etc., covered their music. It makes sense. The music is pretty good, in my opinion, and it fits well with a lot of other experimental music that was gaining popularity around the time that Femtanyl was created. Their popularity among trans people, hell, breakcore music as a whole's popularity among trans people, got me thinking, pretty recently, why do trans people, trans women in particular, like and make experimental music? During my episode of Psychosis around late January of this year, I really wanted an answer to this. I was going through an experimental music phase myself, as one does, and I realized most of the artists I found were trans femme, and I wanted to know if there were any videos already going through this topic. To my surprise, I found immediately 2 videos. Pappo's Trans Music and the Desire to Exist, and Shitty Kickflips, Why Do Trans Women Make Experimental Music? For some reason, I clung on to the former, until I couldn't watch it anymore. Maybe it was the voice, or editing, or the overall aesthetic. Either way, I was pretty much addicted until the psychosis wore off. And in the last few months, it has become quite the controversial video! Mostly because of its blank and the desire to blank title. I saw comments under it saying, hunger and the desire to eat. The fact that it was a cis man claiming to know anything about trans music, or trans themes, or trans aesthetics definitely didn't help his case. This controversy made me want to revisit it, even though I hadn't watched it in a while. I mean, I remembered it being pretty good, but let's see. Pappo starts out talking about the trans aesthetic in video games, about the psychedelic feel, the PS1 graphics, the static overlays. He cites Cruelty Squad, a game with no overt trans themes, as an example of the trans aesthetic. And it would have been a good video. I like videos about trans aesthetics and, whatnot, the vibes, the sauce of it all. But, it just kind of wasn't. It was a horribly made video. It wasn't bad, it wasn't even necessarily harmful, it just... Okay, with the Cruelty Squad thing, it looks like a fun game. As a trans man, I would love to play it, and I currently have it wishlisted, but the reasons he gave for the appeal were all just not about the aesthetic. He talked about the themes in it, the selling of organs, the dehumanization, how these would appeal to trans people, but these don't really matter if you're talking about the vibes, aesthetic, the sauce, the setting, atmosphere, whatever you call it. And he keeps doing this. He doesn't really talk about the tone of the music, the instrumentals, the way the voice is clipped, and that would be fine if he was talking about anything other than aesthetic. He talks about the overt themes, and, like I said, that's fine. I'm good with, surface-level media analysis, but don't talk about the trans aesthetic if you're not going to talk about the trans aesthetic. He doesn't talk about the appeal, at all, why trans people, particularly trans femme people, are so attracted to experimental music or to psychedelic, dissociative atmospheres. He just says it like a fact. Trans people like trans aesthetics, but why? Why is this? Why is it like that? It isn't just the themes in the music, because those themes can be shown through any other framework. I know some themes are more common with some aesthetic, but there is trans media that doesn't fit this whole idea, like One Night Hot Springs and any trans music written in 2016. You can have those themes without those aesthetics, and you can have those aesthetics without those themes, but why is that aesthetic so popular?
I need you to say that to me. Fuck you!
Turns out, the other video I mentioned does a pretty good summary on why trans women make experimental music. Who knew? Why do trans women make experimental music by trans women who make experimental music? Shitty Kickflips. I don't know her real name, but honestly, Shitty Kickflips is a pretty good name already, so who knew that video would properly represent trans women's experimental music? She cites reasons like trans icons already making fucked up music, more or less, the punk movement as a whole, how trans women are treated in society, gender dysphoria, and it makes sense. More or less is really chill, queer people like punk, trans women are being increasingly dehumanized and demonized, and gender dysphoria is a bitch. That makes sense with the music. But neither of these videos really quell my hunger, my craving for a video that summarizes and analyzes the trans aesthetic, the sauce talked about in Pappo's video with the concise reasoning in Shitty Kickflips video. And hopefully this will do it. There's a comment under trans music and the desire to exist that made me pause. Cis guy shocks trans barista by ordering in perfect dissociative disorder. You look at the aspects mentioned, the static, the PS1 graphics, the unconventional game design mixed in with graphics from days past, all really familiar and yet not. It seems like you're looking at a childhood memory, twisted by the flaws of the human mind, churning out a blurry picture of your own past. Dissociation is vital to the trans aesthetic. And you can hear that dissociation in the music as well. The overlaid samples, the almost bit-crushed vocals, the internet aesthetic twisted into something it was never. Welcome to the Internet Transvestite is a comic written by a trans man about a young trans woman navigating the early internet. If you haven't already read it, here's your sign. It depicts Ripley, age 16, figuring out she's trans, exploring her identity through early internet forums, being groomed, and then being outed to her parents. It's received some hate for being mildly anachronistic and a poorly written depiction of trans women, depending on who you speak to. But the writing and all that isn't exactly what I'm here for. I think it's good, but then again, I didn't live during that time, so I don't know if I can really, give an honest opinion on it. The comic lives in the trans aesthetic we've been talking about. All of the artistic choices, the oversaturation, the pixelated stock photos in some frames, the MS Paint drawings, they all lead back to what we've been calling the trans aesthetic. They all lead back to dissociated childhood memories of what could have never logically been, but somehow were. And, I've heard people make the point that the anachronisms serve the same purpose. I don't think I've met a single trans person without at least a little childhood trauma. I mean, it almost comes with the dysphoria, feeling like you're someone you're not, having to suppress identity issues. That starts early. And early identity issues, if you know anything about the human brain, can lead to dissociation. Feel like your body doesn't match and suddenly nothing matches. You become someone else, someone to please everyone else, and before you know it, that someone is real, and you're not. As trauma increases, so too does dissociation. Looking at the statistics, more than 40% of trans people have attempted suicide. Trauma related to one's identity is a breeding ground for complex dissociative disorders. Because the two ingredients are trauma and deflection of the trauma onto a false identity. If it's done early enough in life and done to excess, it can cause the formation of DID, dissociative identity disorder, or OSDD, other specified dissociative disorder. Hell, even if it doesn't cause a complex dissociative disorder, it can still cause dissociation on a lower level. PTSD, CPTSD. They're lower than OSDD and DID, but they're still dissociative. And I think that's it. The secret to the quote-unquote trans aesthetic, as described by Pappo, is dissociation, is trauma. Dissociation is the conduit through which the trans aesthetic shows itself. Dissociation is the means. It's the end. It is the trans aesthetic. At least, it's one of them. As I previously mentioned, there are trans games that don't fit this aesthetic, that are not dissociative, yet tell a trans story anyway. Celeste is often talked about like it is the trans game, and it carries itself in an entirely different way than, say, Cruelty Squad. If you are playing it with transness in mind, then it's a story of self-discovery, of self-love. Madeline, the player character, climbs a mountain in search for something, but in trying to find it, she ends up finding herself along the way, coming to terms with her own issues. I have Celeste wishlisted, and I am currently playing Golden Light, a game with an aesthetic similar to Cruelty Squad's. Trans people have trauma, obviously, but they experience happiness, joy, and the light of life as well. And that's what is missing from Pappo's video on trans music. Sure, he mentions the joy, the warmth, the optimistic side of it all, but it's overshadowed with the trauma. That's what makes it so harmful. The implication that the only trans joy that is able to be felt is the comfort that comes from a lack of trauma, that one can only be comforted if one is first hurt. It's not great. Trans people are not their trauma, not their dysphoria, not their hurt. And they aren't just their best selves either. They're people. People with flaws, people with virtues, with trauma and with comfort. There is no trans aesthetic, because transness is so much more than that. Being queer is more than that. Life is more than that. During the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. And it was the dance that kept us in the fight, because it was the dance we were fighting for. Dan Savage. You have the right to bury, to protest, and to dance. You are an entire person. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.